You think running fixes anything?
I don't know,
I told you
please.
I'd find you, Mary.
Hey,
Please.
back off.
November rain
Hey,
in this city smells like asphalt and the kind of hope
get
you
off her.
regret. I remember the exact moment my cheekbone
Who are
met
you?
that yellow taxi window. Not because of the pain, though it was the sharpest thing I'd ever felt, but because of what I saw in the reflection. A shape, moving fast. Dark clothing. And something metallic catching the parking lot lights like a decision that had already been made. The mall doors were still hissing shut behind me. I'd been counting exits and distances for 7 months, ever since leaving stopped being a fantasy and started being a plan. Garrett grabbed my hair before I reached the door handle. He didn't say anything at first. He never did. The silence was always worse than the words. Then he yanked my head sideways and drove my face into the glass so hard I heard something inside my cheekbone shift, not crack, shift, like furniture being rearranged in a room you're not supposed to be in anymore. The window didn't shatter. It pressed back. Cold, slick with rain, holding the shape of my face like a mold. "There you are," he said. His breath was hot against the back of my neck. Familiar in the way cruelty becomes when you've let it live with you too long. You think running fixes anything? I'd known Garrick for 3 years. Believed him for 2. Endured him for 1. Left him 44 days ago. He found me anyway. If watching a dangerous man cross a parking lot at a full sprint for a woman he doesn't know makes your pulse stop, drop a like right now. Comment where you're from, because what this Korean mob boss does with that wrench in the next 30 seconds is going to change everything you think you know about who gets to be a hero. Then, stillness. Garrick's grip didn't loosen. It abandoned. Not because he chose to. Because something made the choice for him. I didn't see his face first. I saw his hands. Lean, tattooed from wrist to elbow, knuckles wrapped around a heavy steel wrench like it was an extension of something he'd been born carrying. His shirt was black, collar open, sleeves rolled. Not dressed for a fight. Dressed like a man who doesn't need to prepare for one. When I finally looked up past the wrench, past the ink, I saw Jun-suk Park for the first time. He wasn't loud. He wasn't large the way Garrick was large, all rage and wasted size. He was composed in a way that felt dangerous, like a room with no windows. Medium build, sharp jaw, dark eyes that didn't reflect the parking lot lights so much as absorb them. He looked at Garrick the way you look at a stain you're deciding whether to clean or burn away entirely. He was still breathing hard from the sprint. But his voice, when he spoke, was completely level. "Step back." Garrick laughed. He actually laughed. "Who are you supposed to be?" The wrench moved. If you felt your stomach drop just now, if something in you went quiet when that wrench moved, then you're exactly who this channel was built for. Welcome. Seriously. You're not the kind of person who watches things passively. You feel them. And that's rare. Subscribe right now, because people like you deserve a place where stories are told without apology, without shortcuts, without the emotional parts edited out for comfort. This is that place. Hit subscribe. Turn on the bell. And let's finish this story together. 22 days before the mall parking lot, I packed my life into 2 duffel bags, a backpack, and a box of things I couldn't explain why I was still keeping. It was a Wednesday. Garrick had a site job until 5. That gave me 6 hours. My friend Deja helped me load the car. We didn't talk much, just moved with the focus of women who'd been rehearsing this particular exit in whispered phone calls for months. "You sure?" she asked, when the last bag hit the back seat. I wasn't sure about anything except the way my ribs still ached from the week before, and the way I'd started calculating distance to the nearest exit every time I walked into a room. "I'm sure." She pressed a prepaid card and a small canister of pepper spray into my palm. Call me every night. Both of us. I drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. I left my key on the counter, not out of sentiment. Out of finality. A period at the end of a sentence I'd been writing in the wrong person's story. The extended stay motel near the mall district took cash and skipped the questions. $185 a week. The carpet was thin and the walls knew everyone's business, but the door had a deadbolt Garrick had never touched. That was enough. For 3 weeks, I rebuilt something almost resembling a routine. Double shifts at the call center. Coffee with people who didn't know my history. Groceries in small amounts because I still couldn't fully believe I'd be around to finish them. I deleted everything. Changed my number. Told only 3 people where I was, Deja, my sister in another state, and Brianna, because she'd caught me crying in the break room one night and I'd told her more than I should have. I thought I'd been careful. I thought needing someone made them safe. I was wrong about both. Brianna had a daughter in 3rd grade, a landlord losing patience, and a phone that Garrick had been calling daily for 2 weeks, each time with a higher number attached. By the time it reached 4 figures, her desperation had already written the message. She just had to press send. Extended stay off Commerce Boulevard room 114. Works doubles Tuesday through Saturday. Leaves around 9. The notification arrived in Garrick's phone at 7:43 p.m. By 9:15, he was in the parking lot. By 9:22, he had my hair in his fist. By 9:23, someone was sprinting across the wet asphalt toward us, wrench in hand, and I was about to learn that the most dangerous thing in that parking lot that night wasn't the man trying to break me. Would you have told anyone where you were hiding, or would you have disappeared completely alone? Drop your answer below, because the choice Brianna made is about to cost Marin everything, and hand her something far more terrifying in return. 30 minutes before Garrick found me, I was standing in front of a candle display inside the mall pretending to read the label on something called Autumn Hearth. I wasn't reading it. I was watching the reflection in the glass shelf behind it. He'd picked up my trail near the food court. I'd clocked him the second he rounded the corner by the pretzel stand, that particular walk, shoulders rolled forward, jaw set, the kind of body language that had trained me over 3 years to go very, very still. He wasn't running. He didn't need to. He knew I knew he was there. That was the point. I set the candle down without making a sound and moved. The mall was busy enough to be useful, Friday evening crowd, families with strollers, teenagers in clusters, a few elderly couples walking the perimeter for exercise. I used all of them. Slipped between a group of women carrying shopping bags, cut through the corridor near the phone repair kiosk, kept my pace just below a run because running draws eyes and eyes draw attention and attention was the one thing I couldn't afford. I'd mapped this mall in the first week. Exits. Blind spots. The places the cameras didn't reach. There were 2 security guards working the east wing that night. I'd noticed them on my way in, young, both of them, the kind of posting that gets assigned to people still learning the job. One was tall with a lanyard tucked into his shirt pocket. The other was leaning against the wall near the accessories store scrolling his phone, boot heel kicked back behind him like he was waiting for a shift to end. I came around the corner and nearly walked into the tall one. He reached out to steady me, reflex, not suspicion, and for 1 second his eyes moved to something behind my shoulder. I didn't turn around. I already knew what was back there. Sorry, I said. Kept moving. He called something after me, ma'am, slow down, but his voice had the uncertain pitch of someone who wasn't sure if this was his problem yet. The other one had looked up from his phone. I could feel both of them watching, doing the math, deciding whether a woman walking fast in a crowded mall was enough reason to act. It wasn't. Not for them. Not that night. I found the side exit near the loading corridor, a heavy door marked emergency use that the hinge mechanism had long stopped enforcing. It opened with a shove and then I was outside, and the rain hit me immediately. Cold. Hard. The kind of rain that doesn't ease you in. The parking lot sprawled out ahead, half lit by tall sodium lights that turned everything a sick amber color. I spotted the yellow taxi idling near the second row, hazards blinking slow and patient, and I moved toward it like it was the only solid thing in the world. 50 feet. Then 40. Then 30. Behind me, the emergency door swung open again. I didn't have to hear his voice to know. I ran. I never made it to the door handle. 10 feet from the taxi, Garrick's hand closed around the back of my neck and the next few seconds happened the way bad things always do, faster than your brain can file them properly. One moment I was reaching, fingers stretched toward cold metal, and the next my face was against the window glass and the world had narrowed to the sound of my own pulse and the pressure of his forearm driving me sideways. The taxi driver, Denton Shaw, according to the placard I'd glimpsed through the glass, was already looking back at us. I watched his face move through the full sequence. Confusion. Recognition. Fear. Decision. He made his decision fast. The cab lurched forward before Garrick had even finished speaking, tires squealing against the wet asphalt, hazard lights still blinking as it accelerated toward the lot exit like the car itself wanted no part of what was happening. I watched it go. I didn't blame him. I just filed it under the long list of things that weren't going to save me tonight. Garrick yanked my head back by my hair and I heard myself make a sound I didn't recognize, something past crying, past pleading, something that had given up on language entirely. Then I heard footsteps. Not cautious ones. Not the measured approach of someone still deciding. These were the footsteps of someone who had already decided, probably before he'd even crossed half the parking lot, hard, fast strikes against wet concrete, closing distance with the kind of focused momentum that has a destination and nothing else. The wrench connected with Garrick's shoulder before either of us saw it coming. The sound it made wasn't what I expected. Less dramatic. More final. Like a door closing on something that had been open too long. Garrick's grip released, not gradually, all at once, and I dropped against the side of the taxi, catching myself on the mirror bracket, legs trying to remember their job. What happened next, I watched from the ground. Jun Suk didn't speak again after the first hit. Didn't need to. He moved with a cold efficiency that was somehow more frightening than Garrick's rage had been, because rage is weather, loud and temporary. What Jun Suk had was architecture. Structural. Built over time, load-bearing. Garrick went down on the second impact. He didn't get back up. The parking lot went quiet except for the rain. Then a car appeared, dark, clean, engine barely audible, rolling to a stop a few feet from where I was still braced against nothing. The driver stepped out without urgency. Tall, composed, a face that gave nothing away. He looked at Jun Suk first, a glance that carried an entire conversation, then he looked at me. "Can you stand?" he asked. His English was precise. Careful. I looked at Garrick on the ground. I looked at the exit where the yellow taxi had long since disappeared. I looked at the wrench still hanging loose in Jun Suk's hand, rain running down the steel. I stood up. The man, Taejin, I would learn later, simply opened the rear door and waited. I got in. I woke up on a bed that cost more than 3 months of my rent. I knew that the way you know certain things without being told, the weight of the sheets, the particular silence of a room that has never had to apologize for itself. Cream-colored walls. Low lighting. A window with the curtains drawn so precisely they could have been measured. Somewhere beyond them, the faint movement of men on a perimeter I couldn't yet see. My cheekbone had been cleaned and dressed. I didn't remember that happening. I lay still for a moment the way I'd learned to, cataloging everything before moving. One door. A chair near the window with a folded set of clothes that weren't mine. A glass of water on the nightstand, and beside it, nothing threatening. That last part almost made it worse. The door opened before I sat up. Jun Suk Park did not look like a man who knocked. He stepped inside with the ease of someone who had never needed permission for anything, pulled the chair from the window without asking, reversed it, and sat down facing me with his forearms resting across the back. He was dressed simply, dark shirt, no jacket, the ink on his forearms visible in the low light, a map of something I didn't have the context to read yet. His expression was the same as it had been in the parking lot. Not cold, exactly. More like, decided. He let the silence sit for a moment. I got the impression he was comfortable in silence the way most people aren't. "You have no safe place to go back to," he said finally. Not a question. A coordinate. He was locating me on a map I hadn't agreed to be on. I didn't answer. "He'll recover," Jun Suk continued. "Men like that always do. And the next time, he'll be more careful about witnesses." He paused. "I can make certain there is no next time. Or I can have Taejin drive you wherever you'd like to go tonight. Those are your options." I looked at him. "And if I stay?" Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth. More like the adjustment a door makes when a key finally fits the lock properly. "You stay here. Inside these walls, nothing reaches you. Not Garrick. Not anyone Garrick might send. Not anything with your name on it. And what do you get?" He considered that with what felt like genuine respect for the question. "Your presence," he said simply. "Your discretion. And eventually, your trust, if you choose to give it." It was the most dangerous sentence I'd ever heard delivered that quietly. I looked around the room again. Thought about the motel with the thin carpet. Thought about Brianna's text already somewhere in Garrick's deleted folder. Thought about the shape my face had made against that taxi window, the glass pressing back like it was memorizing me for evidence. I thought about what safe had cost me every time I tried to build it alone. "One condition," I said. He waited. "I ask questions. You answer them." Jun Suk studied me for a long moment. Then, for the first time, something in his face moved in a direction I hadn't seen yet. "Fair," he said. "She found me on a Thursday. I didn't know how." That was the part that stayed with me long after she left, not what she asked, but the fact that she'd located me at all. I'd been inside the estate for 4 days. No phone registered to my name. No card transactions. No digital footprint of any kind. As far as the city was concerned, Marin Caldwell had simply stopped generating data. And yet Detective Tamsin Holt was standing in the estate's front receiving room, badge already out, like she'd been given the address by someone who owed her a favor. She was mid-40s, natural hair pulled back, a gray coat that had seen serious weather. The kind of woman who had learned early that underestimation was a resource and had been quietly spending it ever since. She looked at the room, the art, the security panel near the door, the very deliberate absence of anything personal, and she didn't comment on any of it. That told me more about her than anything she said in the next 20 minutes. Taejin had positioned himself near the hallway entrance. Not blocking it. Just present. A reminder of geometry. Ms. Caldwell. She didn't sit when I did. I'll keep this straightforward. There was an incident in the mall parking lot last Friday evening. A significant amount of blood was recovered near a yellow taxi's last recorded GPS position. We have partial footage, a woman matching your description, running. A male subject. She paused. And a third individual we haven't identified yet. I kept my face arranged. I'm not sure what that has to do with me. The male subject, she continued, as though I hadn't spoken, is Garrick Hale. Your former partner. He was admitted to St. Aurelius Medical late that night with serious injuries and discharged himself the following morning against medical advice. She looked at me directly. He's been unreachable since. I said nothing. In my periphery, Tae-Jean hadn't moved. Here's what I find interesting, Holt said, and her voice dropped just slightly, taking on the texture of someone setting something down carefully. You filed a protective order against Hale 7 months ago. It was denied on a technicality. 2 weeks later, you disappeared from your registered address. She tilted her head. And now you're here. In this house. Which belongs to a man my department has been building a file on for 18 months. There it was. She wasn't just here about the parking lot. She was here about all of it, using the parking lot as the door. I came here voluntarily, I said. I'm a guest. Of Junsuk Park. Of a friend. She looked at me for a long moment. The kind of look that doesn't need to announce itself. Then she reached into her coat and placed a card on the table between us, plain, department issued, her direct line handwritten on the back. People who get close to men like your friend, she said quietly, have a tendency to need someone to call. At inconvenient hours. She left without being shown out. I sat with her card on the table in front of me and didn't touch it for a very long time. I found it by accident, the way you find most things that rearrange you. It was the 6th day. Junsuk had given me access to the East Wing library, floor-to-ceiling shelves, a reading desk, natural light in the afternoons. I think he meant it as a gesture of normalcy. Something to do with my hands while the rest of my life held its breath. I wasn't reading. I was existing in a room that felt safer than any room I'd occupied in recent memory, which was its own complicated thing to sit with. I knocked a folder from the desk reaching for a book on the upper shelf. It wasn't labeled. It landed face down and when I picked it up, a photograph slid out and settled on the floor in a way that felt almost deliberate. It was Garrick. Outside the call center where I'd worked until 3 weeks before the mall. Time-stamped. 11 weeks ago. I stood very still. There were more inside the folder. Garrick at the extended stay motel. Garrick in his truck outside the grocery store I'd used twice before switching to a different one. Surveillance images, all of them, sharp, professional, taken from distances that required equipment and patience. Behind them, printed pages. Phone records. A detailed log of Garrick's movements cross-referenced against mine. Dates, locations, overlap points marked in red. And my movements were in there too. Not as a target. As something being protected. The notations beside my entries were clinical, precise, subject unaware, perimeter clear, secondary contact approaching, rerouted. Small moments I hadn't thought anything of at the time. The coworker who'd casually suggested I switch grocery stores. The motel receptionist who'd quietly moved me to a ground floor room with a second exit. The security door at the mall that should have been locked but wasn't. 11 weeks. He had been running a quiet, invisible operation around my life for 11 weeks before the parking lot. I heard the door. Junsuk read the room in 1 second, the open folder, the photographs spread across the desk, my face. He didn't reach for them or offer an explanation immediately. He simply closed the door behind him and waited, which I was beginning to understand was his version of accountability. How long were you watching me? I asked. Long enough to know the protective order was denied, he said. And that you'd have no effective recourse before he found you. That's not an answer. 3 months, he said. Give or take. I looked at the photograph of Garrick outside my former workplace. You cleared my path. The grocery store. The motel room. He didn't confirm or deny it. He didn't need to. Why? I asked. And I meant all of it, not just the logistics, but the decision to begin. The reason a Korean crime syndicate boss had quietly positioned himself as the architect of a stranger's survival. Jun-suk looked at me in that way he had, like he was measuring how much truth the moment could hold. You reminded me of someone, he said, who didn't get a version of this. He picked up the folder, closed it, and set it back on the desk. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. Stop. Did you feel that? You reminded me of someone who didn't get a version of this. 7 words. 7 words and this entire story just cracked open into something completely different. I need you to understand, there are maybe 5 channels on this entire platform that would let a moment like that breathe the way it deserves to breathe. That don't cut away. That don't underline it with music cues and dramatic zooms. If you're not subscribed yet, you are actively choosing to miss the next story like this one. And there will be a next one. There's always a next one. But it won't find you unless you let it. Subscribe. The bell icon is right there. This story still has 4 chapters left and it only gets heavier from here. I heard it before I saw it. It was past midnight. I'd learned quickly that the estate operated on a different clock after dark, quieter on the surface but denser underneath, like a current running below still water. I'd been restless, moving through the east wing toward the kitchen, when the sound reached me through the corridor that ran parallel to the lower courtyard. Not loud. That was the thing. It wasn't loud at all, which somehow made it harder to unhear. I should have turned back. I know that. I've replayed the moment enough times to know exactly where the smarter decision was and exactly why I didn't make it. The corridor had a window running its length, set high, overlooking the interior courtyard below. I stopped at it without fully choosing to. There were 4 men down there. 2 of them I didn't recognize, one seated in a metal chair, wrists bound behind him, head down, the other standing near the courtyard gate with the rigid posture of a man trying to make himself useful by being very still. Taejin stood to the left, jacket off, expression the same as it always was, a wall with eyes. And Jun-suk was in the center of it, speaking. I couldn't hear the words through the glass. I could hear the tone. Low, unhurried, the cadence of someone who has made their point already and is now simply allowing the other person time to understand its full dimensions. The man in the chair said something. I saw his shoulders move with it, desperate, explanatory, the body language of a person trying to spend words like currency they don't actually have. Jun-suk listened. Then he nodded once to Taejin. What happened next was brief and efficient and terrible in the way that purposeful things are terrible, not chaotic, not emotional, just the clean execution of a decision that had been made before any of them walked into that courtyard. The man near the gate was escorted out by 2 others who materialized from the shadows. The man in the chair was not. I stepped back from the window. My reflection looked at me from the dark glass, pale, still holding a glass of water I'd forgotten I was carrying. I stood there until my breathing steadied, until the courtyard below went quiet and the lights shifted and the estate resumed its midnight stillness like a body absorbing something it had learned to metabolize. Jun-suk found me still in the corridor 20 minutes later. He looked at my face and understood immediately. He didn't apologize. I hadn't expected him to. Apology would have been its own kind of dishonesty. That man, he said carefully, made a decision that would have brought significant harm to people inside this house. I know, I said. And I did know. That was the part one was least prepared for, not the shock of what I'd seen, but how quickly my mind had moved past it into something more complicated. Something that frightened me more than the courtyard had. I looked at him directly. "Don't lie to me about what this is." "I won't," he said. "Ever." "Ever," he agreed. We stood in the corridor a moment longer. Then I walked back toward my room, and he let me go, which was its own kind of answer. He'd been watching the detective. That was the part none of US had accounted for, not Jun-suk's surveillance network, not Tae-jin's perimeter checks, not the careful architecture of security that had made me feel, for the first time in months, like something resembling safe. We'd been watching Garrick. We hadn't considered that Garrick, broken and humiliated and burning with the particular obsession of a man who cannot accept an ending he didn't write, would think to watch someone watching us. Detective Holt drove a department-issued sedan that was easy to follow. She'd visited the estate twice after that first Thursday, once with a colleague she didn't introduce, once alone, late in the afternoon when the light was going gray and long. Standard procedure, probably. Building her file on Jun-suk one careful visit at a time. She had no reason to vary her route. She had no reason to believe that a man with a freshly set shoulder and a hospital bracelet still on his wrist was 3 cars back, memorizing her turns. I learned this afterward. The way you learn the mechanics of a close call, in pieces, each one landing separately, each one slightly worse than the last. What I knew in the moment was this: it was just past 10 on a Tuesday night when Tae-jin appeared in my doorway without knocking, which he had never done before. His expression hadn't changed, it never really did, but there was something in the set of his jaw that rearranged the air in the room. "Get dressed," he said. "Practical clothes." I was already moving before he finished the sentence. 3 weeks inside these walls had recalibrated something in me. I'd stopped needing full explanations before my body responded to the tone of a situation. That was either adaptation or something darker. I hadn't decided yet. "Garrick?" I asked, pulling on shoes. "He's been on the outer perimeter for 40 minutes. Tae-jin's voice was even. "He didn't come alone." That landed differently than I expected. Garrick with help was a version of him I hadn't modeled. Garrick alone was rage and history and a pattern I knew the shape of. Garrick with recruited bodies beside him was something that required a different kind of accounting. How many? 2. Neither of them professional. A pause that carried its own meaning. Desperation hires. He moved me through the interior corridor, not the route I used daily, a different one, lower, running beneath the main floor through a passage I hadn't known existed. The estate had layers I was still discovering. That thought would have unsettled me 2 weeks ago. Tonight it was simply useful. We stopped in a reinforced antechamber near the east foundation wall. A monitoring panel on the left showed 6 camera feeds simultaneously. Tae-jin pulled it up without looking at the controls, muscle memory, all of it. Garrick was on the 3rd feed. Standing at the tree line beyond the north gate, phone in hand, the weak glow of the screen catching the lower half of his face. He looked worse than the parking lot had left him. Shoulder sitting wrong. Something unhealed in his posture. But his eyes, even through a grainy night vision feed, were exactly the same. He'd always had the eyes of a man who never really believed a door was closed. They moved at 10:47. I know because I was watching the clock on the monitoring panel with the focused attention of someone who needs numbers to hold on to when everything else is moving too fast. Tae-jin had positioned me in the antechamber with 2 instructions: stay inside the feed range, don't use the exterior door, and then he was gone, absorbed into the estate's darker mechanics the way he always was, present until he wasn't. Jun-suk appeared on the 3rd feed first. He came from the north side approach, not the gate, through a gap in the tree line I hadn't known existed, moving low and fast with 2 men flanking him at distance. No wrench this time. I couldn't see what he was carrying and something told me that was deliberate. The camera angle shifted as the estate's exterior system tracked movement, and I watched Garrick on the adjacent feed register the approach approximately 2 seconds too late. He ran. That surprised me. Somehow I'd built a version of this moment where Garrick stood his ground, where his obsession had calcified into something reckless enough to face Jun-suk directly. But the body knows things the ego won't admit, and Garrick's body had already met Jun-suk once. It remembered. The two men Garrick had brought dissolved almost immediately, one redirected by Tae-jin's people before he cleared the north gate, the other simply gone from the feed in a way that suggested he'd made the smarter decision and run. Desperation hires. Tae-jin had read them correctly. That left Garrick alone in the tree line with nowhere the estate's perimeter didn't already account for. Jun-suk closed the distance in under a minute. I watched the feed. I didn't look away. I think part of me understood that looking away was a luxury I had already forfeited, that staying in this house, accepting this protection, eating at that table and sleeping in those sheets and asking my questions and receiving my answers had been a series of small decisions that added up to this moment on this screen. I didn't get to flinch from the bill. It was over quickly. Quicker than the courtyard had been. More final. Jun-suk stood over Garrick for a moment afterward, still, the way he was always still when something had been resolved, and then he looked directly at the camera. Not past it. At it. At me. It lasted 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked back toward the estate. He came to the antechamber 20 minutes later, composed, a different jacket, hands clean in a way that had required effort. He looked at my face and waited. I thought about Detective Holt's card, still sitting in the drawer of the reading desk in the library. I thought about her voice. People who get close to men like your friend have a tendency to need someone to call. I thought about what calling her now would mean. What it would cost. Who it would expose. I thought about the parking lot. The taxi window. The 44 days of running that had ended in someone else's hands anyway. Is it finished? I asked. Yes, Jun-suk said. I nodded once. Stood up. Walked past him toward the corridor. Marin. I stopped but didn't turn. You don't have to stay. I stood there a moment in the doorway, the estate quiet around us, Holt's imaginary questions already forming their shape in the back of my mind. I know, I said. I stayed. I want you to think about what you just watched. A woman who had every reason to call Detective Holt. Every reason to walk out the front door, press charges, rebuild quietly, alone. And she didn't. Not because she was naive, because she was honest with herself about what safe had cost her every time she tried to build it alone. That's not a small thing. That's a person in full. If this story made you feel something you're still carrying, if you're going to think about Marin tomorrow, and the day after, then do one thing before the last chapter. Subscribe. Leave a comment. Tell me what moment broke you open. Because the people watching this channel are the ones who don't look away. And that community is worth being part of. Detective Holt came on a Friday morning, which felt deliberate. Fridays have a particular psychology, people are looser, more relieved, less defended. She struck me as someone who understood that. She arrived without calling ahead, which also felt deliberate, and was shown into the front receiving room by Tae-jin, who offered her coffee with the serene hospitality of a man who had never done anything worth investigating in his life. She declined the coffee. Smart. I came downstairs in clothes that fit properly for the first time in months. Jun-suk had arranged that quietly, the way he arranged most things, without making a transaction of it. I sat across from Holt and folded my hands in my lap and looked at her with the steady expression of a woman who had made her decision and finished grieving it. She studied me for a moment before she opened her notebook. Garrick Hale, she said. Still unreachable. His apartment's been cleared out. Phone's dead. She paused. You wouldn't know anything about that. It wasn't a question. It was an offering, a small open window she was holding up to see if I'd lean toward it. Garrick left, I said. He did that sometimes. Disappeared for weeks when things didn't go his way. I'd expect he'll surface eventually somewhere that isn't here. Holt wrote something I couldn't read. And the parking lot incident. A bad night, I said. He found me. It got physical. Someone intervened and he ran. I didn't get a clear look at who. I held her gaze through all of it. I was concussed and frightened and I made it inside and called a car. I should have reported it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. The silence that followed had weight. Holt let it sit, the way experienced people do, giving it room to pressure the other person into filling it. I'd learned that particular technique from watching Jun-suk. I let the silence be silence. Finally she closed the notebook. She looked at me, not with suspicion exactly, more with the particular exhaustion of a woman who can see the shape of something she cannot prove. You're staying here, she said. I am. With him. Yes. She picked up her bag. Stood. Moved toward the door and then stopped with her hand on the frame, her back still partly to me. I've been doing this work for 19 years, Ms. Caldwell. The women who end up in houses like this one, they don't usually leave through the front door. I looked at her steadily. I appreciate your concern, detective. She left. I sat in the receiving room for a while after, listening to the estate settle around me, the distant movement of men on the perimeter, the low exchange of voices from the far corridor, the sound of Taejin on a call somewhere above. The infrastructure of a different kind of life, running its quiet continuous current beneath everything. Jun-suk found me there an hour later. He didn't ask how it had gone. He read it in the room. He sat down across from me, unhurried, and slid a phone across the table. New. Registered to nothing. There's something you should know, he said. About what's moving toward us from the west coast. I picked up the phone. Tell me, I said.